Life with Larissa started like a dream I never thought I'd live. She was unlike anyone I'd ever met. Dynamic, bold, and with a laugh that could fill a room. When we first met, I was working as a software engineer in the city, content with my quiet, steady life. Larissa entered like a storm, shaking up everything I thought I knew about love. Our early days were a whirlwind of shared dreams and late-night conversations. She had ambition and energy, qualities I admired deeply. We married within 2 years of meeting and moved to the suburbs, trading the city's chaos for a quieter life. It felt right, at least for a while. But as the years passed, I began to notice changes. Larissa, who once reveled in our shared routines, started to talk about missing the excitement of the city. She seemed restless, but I told myself it was just a phase. We all go through ups and downs, right? I tried to support her in every way I could. I encouraged her to take on new projects at work and gave her space to pursue hobbies. Yet, the more I tried, the more she seemed to drift. Our conversations grew shorter, and the warmth that once defined our home turned into a polite, frosty silence. I didn't know it then, but this was the beginning of the unraveling. Looking back, the changes in Larissa started small, subtle enough that I dismissed them at first. She began coming home later than usual, always with a ready explanation. A last-minute meeting, traffic, or helping a coworker with a project. She started dressing differently too, swapping her usual comfortable attire for sharp, tailored outfits that I assumed were for work. At first, I didn't question it. I wanted to be the supportive husband, the kind of partner who celebrated her growth rather than hindered it. She's working hard, I told myself. She deserves to feel confident. But her enthusiasm for work became something else entirely. She started mentioning a colleague, Dmitri, in casual conversation. At first, it was just his name, an anecdote about a meeting, a joke he told, or his supposedly brilliant ideas. Over time, his name crept into more stories, always accompanied by a faint smile that I couldn't help but notice. I told myself not to overthink it. Dmitri was just a coworker, a part of her professional life. Yet, something about the way she spoke of him made my stomach tighten. Then came the phone calls. She would step outside or retreat to another room to take them, her voice a hushed murmur. When I asked who it was, she'd wave it off. Just work stuff, she'd say with an airy laugh, as though I were being silly for even asking. The distance between us grew. Conversations about our day turned into brief exchanges about groceries or bills. Dinners became quiet affairs, punctuated by her distracted glances at her phone. At night, she'd turn away from me in bed, claiming exhaustion. One evening, she announced she was going on a weekend retreat with her team. It's mandatory, she said, her tone clipped and defensive as though expecting an argument. I didn't want to be the jealous husband, so I nodded and told her to enjoy herself. But as she packed her bags, I couldn't shake the unease settling in my chest. When she returned, she was different, more aloof, yet oddly radiant. She was quick to dismiss my questions about the retreat, brushing them off with vague answers. It was fine, she said, her eyes darting away. Just the usual work stuff. Something was wrong. I could feel it in the way she avoided my gaze, in the growing silence between us. But I didn't have proof, and I didn't want to believe the worst. Instead, I blamed myself. Maybe I wasn't doing enough. Maybe I wasn't exciting enough. I started planning small surprises, her favorite dinner, a spontaneous weekend getaway, but nothing seemed to reach her. She would smile politely, thank me, and then retreat back into her world, a world that felt increasingly closed off from mine. The tipping point came one night when I overheard her on the phone. She was in the kitchen, her voice low but unmistakably playful. I couldn't make out every word, but the tone was enough. My heart sank as I stood in the hallway, frozen in place. When she hung up, I stepped into the kitchen, trying to mask the storm of emotions brewing inside me. "Who was that?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "Oh, just Dmitri," she said casually, not even looking up from her phone. Dmitri again. The name was a dagger now, sharp and cold. "Is everything okay?" I pressed, hoping for a crack in her facade. She laughed, a hollow sound. "Of course. You worry too much." But her words did nothing to soothe me. Deep down, I knew something was slipping away, something vital and irreplaceable. And for the first time, I began to wonder if Larissa had already crossed a line we could never uncross. I tried to push the unease aside, convincing myself that I was imagining things. But no matter how much I tried to rationalize Larissa's behavior, the nagging doubts wouldn't leave me. The woman who once shared everything with me now seemed to live a life I knew nothing about, and Dimitri's name loomed over us like a shadow I couldn't ignore. The signs became harder to dismiss. One evening, as Larissa showered, her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. I didn't mean to invade her privacy, but my curiosity and growing suspicion got the better of me. The screen lit up with a message. "Can't stop thinking about this weekend. When can I see you again? Dimitri." My chest tightened, and my hands felt numb as I stared at the screen. The words confirmed what I'd been too afraid to acknowledge. This wasn't a close friendship or professional camaraderie. This was betrayal, written plainly in a text message. I didn't confront her right away. Instead, I started watching more closely, piecing together the puzzle of her deceit. Her weekend retreat? A lie. The late-night phone calls? A lie. The work projects that kept her away for hours? All lies. I needed more proof, not for myself. I already knew the truth, but for the confrontation I knew was inevitable. Over the next few days, I noticed patterns. She'd leave the house dressed impeccably for supposed work meetings and come back with an energy that felt foreign, as though she'd spent the day in someone else's world. One evening, I followed her. It felt wrong, like a violation of trust, but the irony wasn't lost on me. Larissa had already shattered that trust, and I was just trying to gather the pieces. She parked outside a small, dimly lit restaurant, the kind of place you'd choose for a quiet rendezvous. I stayed in my car, watching as Dimitri arrived and greeted her with a familiarity that spoke volumes. They laughed, leaning close over their table, sharing a world I had no part in. I drove home, my heart pounding with anger, humiliation, and a deep, aching sadness. That night, I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Every moment we'd shared, every promise we'd made, now felt like a cruel joke. The next day, I decided to confront her. As she walked through the door, I was waiting, the weight of my discovery pressing heavily on my chest. "Did you have a good time?" I asked, my voice calm but cold. She paused, caught off guard. "What do you mean?" I held up my phone, where I'd taken a picture of her and Dimitri at the restaurant. Her face paled as she stared at the image. "Care to explain this?" I asked, my voice trembling with restrained emotion. For a moment, she didn't speak. Then she sighed, her expression shifting into something almost defiant. "You've been spying on me," she asked, deflecting instead of addressing the issue. "Don't turn this around on me," I snapped, my calm facade cracking. "I trusted you, Larissa. I gave you everything, and this is what you do." She rolled her eyes, her tone dripping with irritation. "It's not what you think. Dimitri and I are just friends." "Friends," I repeated, incredulous. "Do friends send messages like this?" I showed her the text I'd seen earlier, and for a moment, her confidence wavered. But she quickly recovered, crossing her arms. "You're being dramatic. It's harmless." Her lies stung more than the betrayal itself. Even caught red-handed, she refused to admit the truth, twisting the knife deeper with every word. "Harmless," I echoed, my voice breaking. "You've been lying to me for months, Larissa. This isn't harmless. This is destroying everything we built together." She didn't respond. Instead, she grabbed her purse and walked out the door, leaving me standing alone in the suffocating silence of our once shared home. I realized then that Larissa wasn't just betraying me. She was refusing to take any responsibility for the wreckage she'd caused. And in that moment, I knew our marriage was crumbling, piece by painful piece. Larissa didn't come home that night. I stayed up, pacing the living room, my mind running through every possible outcome of this unraveling situation. When she finally returned the next morning, her expression was calm, almost rehearsed, as if she'd spent the night crafting a strategy. "I think we need to talk," I began, my voice heavy with exhaustion. She dropped her bag by the door and crossed her arms, leaning against the wall. "Fine," she said, her tone neutral. Let's talk. There was no remorse in her voice, no sign that she understood the weight of her actions. It made me angrier than I thought possible. I know about you and Dmitri, I said, my voice firm despite the lump in my throat. I know you've been lying to me. I know about the texts, the dinners, the retreat that wasn't a retreat. I know everything. Her face remained unreadable for a moment, and then she let out a dry laugh. You think you know everything, she said, shaking her head. You're blowing this way out of proportion, Yevgeny. Blowing this out of proportion? I repeated, my voice rising. You've been sneaking around with another man, lying to me every chance you get, and you think I'm overreacting? She sighed and rubbed her temples, as if I were the one causing her stress. Look, Dmitri and we're just close. We connect in ways you and I don't anymore. That doesn't mean what you think it means. Her words felt like a slap in the face. What ways, Larissa? What ways do you connect? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been having an affair. And what if I have? She snapped suddenly, her voice sharp and defensive. What if I needed something you couldn't give me? Have you ever thought about that? About how boring and predictable everything's become. Her words hit me like a freight train, each one slicing through the love I'd clung to for so long. Boring and predictable? I echoed, my voice barely above a whisper. Is that what you call stability? Loyalty? Love? She rolled her eyes. Don't be so dramatic. This happens to people all the time. It doesn't have to mean the end of the world. But it was the end of my world. The woman I had loved, trusted, and built a life with was standing in front of me, dismissing her betrayal as though it were a minor inconvenience. I can't do this, I said, stepping back. I can't live like this, with someone who doesn't respect me, doesn't value what we've built. Then don't, she said coldly. If you can't handle it, maybe we're better off apart. Her words left me stunned. I had expected excuses, pleas for forgiveness, maybe even tears. But this cold indifference was worse than any of that. For a long moment, we stood in silence, the weight of her words settling between us. Then, I turned and walked upstairs to pack a bag. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay. As I closed the door behind me, I felt a mix of devastation and clarity. Larissa had made her choice, and now I had to make mine. I left that day, leaving behind the life I thought we had and the woman I thought I knew. It was the hardest thing I had ever done, but in my heart, I knew it was the only choice left. Leaving the house felt like tearing away a piece of my soul. Everything in it, every photo, every piece of furniture, was tied to memories of the life Larissa and I had built. But now, those memories felt hollow, tainted by her betrayal. I moved into a small, sparsely furnished apartment on the other side of town. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I spent the first few nights staring at the ceiling, haunted by everything Larissa had said. Her words replayed in my mind, over and over. Maybe we're better off apart. Divorce wasn't something I had ever imagined for us. When we exchanged vows, I believed we were in it for the long haul. I had envisioned growing old together, building a family, sharing dreams. Now, all of that was gone, swept away by her lies and indifference. The paperwork came quickly. Larissa, ever pragmatic, didn't seem to want to drag things out. She called me once, suggesting we divide things amicably. Her tone was detached, businesslike, as though we were discussing a contract, not the dissolution of our marriage. Take whatever you want, I said, my voice heavy with resignation. I don't care about the stuff. She hesitated, then sighed. Fine. Let's just get this over with. That was the last time we spoke directly for months. Our lawyers handled the rest. As the days turned into weeks, I tried to focus on rebuilding my life. I buried myself in work, taking on extra projects to fill the hours. Friends reached out, offering their support, but I wasn't ready to talk. How could I explain the depths of my heartbreak? Yet, amidst the pain, there was a strange kind of clarity. For the first time in years, I was forced to confront the parts of myself I had neglected. In my effort to support Larissa, I had let pieces of myself fade away. Now, I had a chance to rediscover who I was outside of our marriage. Larissa, I later learned, had moved in with Dmitri not long after I left. I wasn't surprised, but the knowledge still stung. Their affair was no longer a secret, and people whispered about it at mutual gatherings. Some friends reached out, offering apologies on her behalf, but I didn't want to hear it. She had made her choice, and I was determined to move forward without her. Then came a day I'll never forget. It was early evening when I received a call from a mutual friend, Anna. Her voice was hesitant, almost apologetic. "I thought you should know," she said. "Larissa and Dmitri. It's not going well. He's been seeing someone else." I didn't know how to feel. There was no joy in hearing that her new relationship was falling apart, no satisfaction in her suffering. If anything, it made me sad for the woman I had once loved, the woman who had thrown everything away for something that wasn't real. The divorce was finalized a few months later. The papers arrived in a manila envelope, stark and official. Signing them felt like closing a chapter one had never wanted to end. But with that closure came a sense of liberation. Larissa's betrayal had shattered my world, but it hadn't destroyed me. I was still standing, still breathing, still capable of rebuilding. As I slid the signed papers into the return envelope, I made a silent vow to myself. I would not let her choices define my future. This was the beginning of something new, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of hope. The days after the divorce felt strangely quiet, like the calm after a storm. The chaos of lawyers, paperwork, and emotional turmoil was over, leaving behind an emptiness I wasn't sure how to fill. My apartment, with its bare walls and second-hand furniture, was a reflection of my life, stripped down, starting over. At first, I threw myself into work. It was a convenient distraction, a way to keep my mind occupied and my heart from aching. My colleagues noticed my increased focus, but no one asked questions. Perhaps they sensed that I wasn't ready to talk, or maybe they just respected my need for space. But work could only do so much. Nights were the hardest. I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, my thoughts drifting back to Larissa. Not to the woman she had become in the end, but to the woman I had fallen in love with, the one who had once been my best friend, my partner in everything. Eventually, I realized I couldn't move forward if I stayed trapped in the past. So, I started making changes, small ones at first. I joined a gym, not because I had a particular goal in mind, but because the physical exertion helped clear my head. I began cooking for myself, experimenting with recipes that Larissa had never liked but that I had always wanted to try. Then there were the weekends. I began exploring the city, visiting museums, parks, and little cafes I'd never taken the time to notice before. I started attending events, book readings, live music performances, even a pottery class. It was awkward at first, showing up alone, but I quickly realized that I wasn't the only one seeking connection and purpose. Through these activities, I met new people. Some became acquaintances, others friends. Slowly, my world expanded, and I began to see life as something filled with possibilities rather than limitations. One of the most pivotal moments came during a charity event my company organized. It was a gala, the kind of affair I used to dread but now saw as an opportunity. As I mingled with colleagues and other attendees, I struck up a conversation with a woman named Nadezhda. She was warm, thoughtful, and refreshingly genuine. There was no pretense with her, no games. We talked about everything: our work, our hobbies, even our struggles. I found myself opening up to her in a way I hadn't with anyone since Larissa. Over the next few months, Nadezhda and I grew closer. We started as friends, meeting for coffee or going on walks, but it wasn't long before our connection deepened. She wasn't just kind, she was supportive, encouraging me to embrace the parts of myself I had neglected during my marriage. One evening, as we sat on a park bench watching the sunset, she reached for my hand. "You've been through so much," she said softly. "But I see so much strength in you, Yevgeny. You deserve happiness." Her words brought tears to my eyes, but they were tears of relief, of hope. For the first time in years, I felt seen, not as a man defined by his past, but as someone with a future worth embracing. Our relationship blossomed, and with it came a new sense of purpose. Nadezhda and I shared dreams and built plans together. We moved into a cozy home, and not long after, we welcomed a beautiful baby girl into our lives. Being a father was a role I had always wanted but never thought I'd have. Holding my daughter for the first time was a moment of pure joy, a reminder that life could be rebuilt, even after being shattered. Yet, even as I moved forward, the past lingered. Larissa's betrayal had left scars, and while they no longer bled, they were still there, a reminder of the lessons I'd learned. Trust, I realized, was fragile, but it was also something that could be rebuilt, with the right person. Nadezhda became my anchor, my partner in every sense of the word. Together, we created a life filled with love, laughter, and mutual respect. A life that stood in stark contrast to the one I had left behind. I thought of Larissa occasionally, wondering if she had found peace or if she was still chasing something she couldn't define. But those thoughts no longer consumed me. My focus was on the present, on the family I had built and the future I was creating. What Larissa had taken from me, Nadezhda had helped me rediscover. And for that, I would always be grateful. It had been years since I'd last seen Larissa. Life had taken me far from the person I was during our marriage. Nadezhda and I were thriving, raising our daughter in a home filled with love and understanding. The wounds Larissa left behind had faded into distant scars, memories I rarely revisited. That was, until the day our paths unexpectedly crossed at a family gathering. The occasion was a milestone birthday for one of my distant cousins, someone Larissa and I had both been close to during our marriage. I debated whether to attend, knowing there was a chance she might be there. But I didn't want to let old fears dictate my choices. Nadezhda encouraged me, as she always did. "You've moved on," she said with a reassuring smile. "This is your family too. Don't let the past keep you away." When we arrived, the warm buzz of conversation and laughter filled the room. I carried our daughter on my hip, introducing her to relatives she'd never met. Nadezhda, ever graceful, mingled easily, her presence as grounding as always. It wasn't until I turned to refill my plate that I saw her. Larissa stood near the far corner of the room, holding a glass of wine and chatting with someone I didn't recognize. Her once vivid confidence seemed dimmed, her posture slightly slouched. She looked up, her eyes catching mine. For a moment, time froze. She made her way over, her smile tentative. "Yevgeny," she said, her voice tinged with a mix of surprise and hesitation. "It's been a long time." "It has," I replied, keeping my tone polite but neutral. Her gaze shifted to the toddler in my arms. "Is this your daughter?" I nodded, smiling down at my little girl. "Yes, this is Masha." "She's beautiful," Larissa said softly, her voice tinged with something I couldn't quite place. Regret, perhaps? Nadezhda joined us then, her presence immediately setting me at ease. I introduced her to Larissa, and they exchanged pleasantries. Nadezhda was warm but firm, her subtle protectiveness not lost on me. The conversation didn't last long. Larissa excused herself, retreating back to her corner. But throughout the evening, I noticed her watching us, her expression distant, as though she were lost in thought. Later, as the gathering wound down, Larissa approached me again, this time when I was alone. "Can we talk?" she asked, her tone earnest. I hesitated but nodded. We stepped outside into the crisp evening air. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry," she began, her voice trembling. "For everything. For what I did to you, to us. I didn't realize how much I'd hurt you until it was too late." Her words were unexpected, and for a moment, I didn't know how to respond. I searched her face, seeing a vulnerability that hadn't been there before. "I appreciate the apology," I said finally. "But you didn't just hurt me, Larissa. You destroyed the trust we built. And that's not something you can undo with an apology." "I know," she said quickly, tears brimming in her eyes. "I've lived with that regret every day. Dmitri, he left me. I thought I was chasing happiness, but all I found was emptiness." I sighed, the weight of her words settling heavily between us. "I've moved on," I said gently. "I'm happy now, Larissa. Truly happy. And I hope you can find peace too." She nodded, wiping at her eyes. "You deserve that, Yevgeny. You always did." We stood there for a moment longer before she turned and walked back inside. I watched her go, feeling a mixture of emotions, sympathy, closure, and most importantly, gratitude. Gratitude for the life I had now, for the choices that had led me to Nadezhda and Masha. As I returned to my family, I felt a profound sense of peace. The chapter with Larissa was finally, truly closed. What she had taken from me, I had rebuilt stronger than before. And now, I could leave the past behind, knowing it no longer had any power over me. The encounter with Larissa lingered in my mind for a few days. Not with the sharp pain of old wounds, but with a quiet sense of finality. Her apology had been sincere, and while it didn't erase the past, it gave me something I hadn't realized I needed: closure. Life moved forward, as it always does. Nadezhda and I returned to our routines, busy with work, parenting, and the joyful chaos of raising Masha. Our daughter was growing fast, her laughter filling every corner of our home. Watching her discover the world reminded me of life's simple joys, the ones I had forgotten during my years with Larissa. One evening, as I tucked Masha into bed, she looked up at me with her wide, curious eyes. "Papa," she said, her voice soft, "why are you smiling?" I hadn't realized I was. "Because I'm happy," I told her, brushing a stray curl from her forehead. "Good," she said, her small arms wrapping around my neck. "I like it when you're happy." Her words stayed with me long after she drifted off to sleep. They were a reminder of how far I'd come, from the heartbreak and betrayal that once consumed me to the life I now cherished. A few weeks later, I received an unexpected message from Larissa. It was brief, just a thank you for hearing her out at the family gathering. She mentioned she was moving to a new city, looking for a fresh start. I wished her well, silently hoping she would find the peace she was searching for. In truth, I bore her no ill will anymore. The anger and resentment had faded, replaced by understanding. Larissa had made her choices, and I had made mine. And those choices had led me to this moment, to the family I adored and the life I never could have imagined. As the years passed, Nadezhda and I built a life full of love and purpose. We supported each other through challenges, celebrated each other's successes, and never took for granted the trust we shared. Every now and then, I would reflect on the journey that brought me here. Larissa's betrayal had been devastating, but it had also been a turning point, a chance to rediscover myself and embrace the kind of life I truly wanted. One evening, as Nadezhda and I sat on the porch watching Masha chase fireflies in the yard, she leaned her head against my shoulder. "Are you happy, Yevgeny?" she asked softly. I turned to her, my heart full. "I am," I said without hesitation. "More than I ever thought I could be." In that moment, I realized something profound. The pain of the past had shaped me, but it didn't define me. I had chosen to move forward, to build something beautiful from the ashes. And in doing so, I had found a happiness that was genuine and enduring. The horizon stretched out before us, full of promise and possibility. And for the first time in years, I felt nothing but gratitude for the lessons, the love, and the life that lay ahead.